They say kindness is free, but for Sarah Bennett, it cost her everything she had. She was a waitress earning barely enough to feed her own daughter, yet every single day at noon, she snuck a warm meal out the back door to a crippled, smelly beggar everyone else spat on. She risked her job, her tips, and her dignity, but she didn't know that the shivering man in the dirty rags wasn't a beggar at all. He was Arthur Sterling, the billionaire real estate tycoon who had been missing for 6 months. And he wasn't just hungry for food, he was hunting for an heir. And Sarah? She just passed the test. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the grime slicker. That's how it felt to Sarah Bennett as she stared out the grease-stained window of the Silver Fork Diner. It was a Tuesday, the lunch rush was over, and the grey sky outside matched the colour of her bank account statement. "Table 4 needs a refill, Sarah. Stop daydreaming or I'll dock your pay." The voice boomed from the kitchen. It was Rick, the manager. Rick was a man who sweated grease and bled hostility. He was the kind of boss who would charge employees for the water they drank during a shift if he could get away with it. "Coming, Rick," Sarah called back, wiping her hands on her apron. She grabbed the coffee pot, forcing a smile onto her face as she walked out to the floor. Sarah was 26, but her eyes looked 40. Being a single mother to a 6-year-old girl with severe asthma will do that to you. Her daughter Lily was currently staying with a neighbor because Sarah couldn't afford the heating bill in their apartment. The landlord, a faceless corporation called Sterling Estates, had sent her a final eviction notice 3 days ago. She needed $500 by Friday, or she and Lily would be on the street. She poured coffee for a regular old Mr. Henderson, who left a 50-cent tip on a $10 bill. She pocketed the coins, feeling the weight of them. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. At 2 p.m., the diner quieted down. This was the dangerous time. This was the time Rick usually went into his office to count the till and smoke a cigarette. It was also the time he arrived. Sarah glanced toward the back door near the dish pit. Through the small, wire-reinforced window, she saw him. He was huddled against the dumpster, trying to shield himself from the relentless drizzle with a piece of soggy cardboard. He wore a coat that was more holes than fabric, and one of his legs was twisted at an odd angle, dragging behind him whenever he moved. The locals called him Hobbling Henry. Most people crossed the street to avoid the smell. Rick had threatened to call the police on him twice this week already. Sarah looked around. Rick was gone. The cook, a teenager named Kyle, who spent most of his time texting, was in the bathroom. Sarah moved fast. She grabbed a to-go box and ladled a generous portion of beef stew into it, the special of the day. She added 2 warm rolls and a packet of butter, her heart hammered against her ribs. If Rick saw this, she was fired. No warnings. Just fired. And if she lost this job, she lost the apartment, and she lost Lily. She slipped out the back door, the cold air biting through her thin uniform. "Henry," she whispered. The pile of rags stirred. A face looked up, caked in dirt, framed by a matted grey beard. But the eyes were startlingly blue, sharp, piercing, and strangely intelligent. "Sarah!" the man rasped. His voice sounded like gravel crunching under tires. "You shouldn't come out here. The ogre is watching." "Eat this quickly," she said, pressing the warm box into his trembling hands. "It's beef stew. It'll help with the cold." The old man didn't tear into the food like a starving animal, which always surprised her. He opened the box with a strange sort of dignity, nodding his head slowly. "You're too good for this place, girl," he muttered, breaking a roll. "Why do you do it? I can offer you nothing. I am filth to this city." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Because everyone gets hungry, Henry, and I know what it's like to have empty pockets and no one to help. Henry paused, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. He looked at her shoes, worn-out sneakers with holes in the toes. Trouble at home? Eviction, Sarah admitted. She didn't know why, she told him. Maybe because he was the only person who actually listened to her. Friday, if I don't pay up, we're out. How much? 500. She laughed, a dry, hopeless sound. Might as well be 5 million. Henry chewed slowly, his gaze fixed on a puddle near his foot. The wheel turns, Sarah. Sometimes the bottom goes to the top, and the top crashes down. You keep your spirit. That is true currency. Spirit doesn't pay for asthma inhalers, Henry, she sighed. Stay warm. I have to go back. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. One day, he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the rasp for a split second, sounding almost powerful. One day, you will be served, and the world will wait on you. Sarah gave him a sad smile. In my dreams, maybe. She slipped back inside, her heart rate slowly returning to normal. She didn't see the way Henry watched the door close. She didn't see him pull a small, pristine leather notebook from the inner lining of his filthy coat. And she certainly didn't see him write her name, Sarah Bennett, under a column titled, The Only One. But the trouble was just beginning. As Sarah turned the corner back into the kitchen, she slammed right into a solid wall of chest. It was Rick, and he wasn't smiling. Rick stood there, arms crossed, the smell of stale tobacco clinging to his shirt. His face was red, a vein throbbing in his temple. I knew it, he hissed. I knew you were stealing from me. Sarah's blood ran cold. Rick, it was just the leftovers, the stew from yesterday. You were going to throw it out anyway. It's inventory, Rick shouted, his voice echoing into the dining room. A few customers looked up, startled. That food costs money, and you're giving it to that rat outside? That vermin scares away paying customers. He's a human being, Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. He's hungry. I don't care if he's the Pope. Rick slammed his hand on the counter. You are stealing from the silver fork. That comes out of your paycheck. My paycheck? Sarah gasped. Rick, please, I'm already short. I have to pay rent by Friday or I lose my home. You can't deduct a full meal price for leftovers. Rick stepped closer, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice to a sneer. I can do whatever I want, Sarah, because you need this job. You're desperate, and desperate people don't get to make demands. He pulled a notepad from his pocket. $40. That's the cost of the meal plus a penalty for theft. I'm taking it out of your tips today. $40? Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. That was her entire day's earnings. That was the money for Lily's medicine. Rick, have a heart. Please. You want to keep your job? Rick pointed a thick finger at the floor. Get a mop. The bathroom overflowed. Clean it up. And if I see you near that back door again, don't bother coming back. Sarah swallowed her pride. She thought of Lily's wheezing cough. She thought of the cold street. She nodded, grabbed the mop bucket, and went to the bathroom. As she scrubbed the filthy tiles, tears finally fell, mixing with the harsh chemical smell of bleach. She felt small, worthless. Outside, in the alley, Henry had finished the stew. He carefully wiped his mouth with a rag. He had heard the shouting. The walls of the diner were thin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. It wasn't a burner flip phone like a homeless man might have. It was a satellite smartphone, the kind used by military contractors and CEOs who needed secure lines. He dialed a number. This is Sterling, he said into the phone. The gravelly Beggar voice was gone. In its place was the cold, authoritative baritone of Arthur Sterling, a man who moved markets with a whisper. "Sir?" The voice on the other end was panicked. "Mr. Sterling! My God, we've been looking everywhere. The board is in chaos. The stock has dropped 15%. Where are you?" "I am where I need to be, Jenkins. I am conducting an audit." "An audit?" "Sir, you're listed as a missing person. Your nephew, Charles, is trying to declare you legally incapacitated so he can take control of the estate." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "Charles, I expected as much. Listen to me carefully, Jenkins. I need a file on a property, the Regency Apartments on 4th Street. The slum buildings? We own those through a shell company, sir. They are slated for demolition next month. Find out who manages the evictions there, specifically for a tenant named Sarah Bennett. I want that eviction notice put on hold." "On hold, sir? But the demolition contracts are signed." "Did I stutter, Jenkins?" Arthur's voice was like a whip. "Pause it. Do not cancel it yet. Just pause it. I need to see how far she will go." "Understood, sir. Should I send a car?" "No, I have one more test to run." "And Jenkins?" "Yes, sir. Find out who owns the Silver Fork Diner. I might be in the market for a restaurant." Arthur hung up and tucked the phone away. He leaned back against the brick wall, closing his eyes. He was a billionaire, yes. He had cars, jets, mansions. But 6 months ago, after a car accident that left him temporarily crippled and unrecognizable, he had crawled out of the wreckage and seen something horrifying. His own family hadn't looked for him. They had looked for his will. Disgusted, Arthur had decided to stay missing. He grew out his beard, let his clothes rot, and wandered the streets of the city he practically owned. He wanted to see if there was anyone left in this world who was actually good. Not good because they wanted his money, but good because they had a soul. He had been spat on, kicked, and ignored by thousands, until he sat behind this diner. Sarah Bennett was the only one. But Arthur Sterling was a businessman. He didn't just reward kindness. He tested character. He needed to know if Sarah was strong enough to handle the weight of the fortune he was considering leaving her. The back door opened again. Arthur quickly slumped over, resuming his hobbling Henry persona. It was Rick. He came out with a bucket of dirty dishwater. "Hey, vermin!" Rick shouted. Arthur looked up. Splash! Rick threw the bucket of cold, greasy grey water directly onto Arthur. Arthur gasped as the freezing liquid soaked his rags. "I told you to scramble," Rick laughed. "Next time it'll be boiling water. Get lost!" Rick slammed the door shut, locking it. Arthur sat there, dripping wet, smelling of old ketchup and dish soap. The cold was seeping into his bones. His bad leg throbbed with agony. Inside the diner, Sarah watched from the window, horrified. She had seen it all. She saw Rick throw the water. She saw Henry shivering, unable to get up because the ground was now slick with grease. She looked at the clock. She still had 3 hours on her shift. If she walked out now to help him, Rick would fire her. She would lose the apartment. She would lose everything. But then she saw Henry try to stand and slip, hitting his head against the dumpster. He didn't move. Sarah didn't think. She ripped off her apron and threw it on the floor. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Rick yelled from the register. "To be a human being, Rick. Something you forgot how to be," Sarah shouted back, her voice ringing through the diner. Everyone went silent. She stormed out the back door. She knelt beside Henry in the freezing muck. "Henry, Henry, can you hear me?" "Sarah," he groaned. Your job. Forget the job," she said, tears streaming down her face. She took off her own coat, her only winter coat, and wrapped it around his soaking wet shoulders. "Come on, I'm taking you to the shelter. I'm not leaving you here." She hooked her arm under his, straining to lift him. She was small, and he was a heavy man, but adrenaline gave her strength. As she dragged him toward the street, the back door flew open. Rick stood there, his face purple. "You're done, Bennett. You hear me? You're fired. Don't come back for your check. I'm keeping it for damages." Sarah didn't look back. She adjusted the weight of the billionaire on her shoulder and walked into the rain. "It's okay, Henry," she whispered. "I've got you." Arthur Sterling, head resting on the shoulder of a woman who had just sacrificed her livelihood for him, allowed a single tear to cut through the grime on his cheek. Test passed, he thought. Now it's time for war. The walk to Sarah's apartment was a 3-mile trudge through freezing rain. Sarah's arms burned from the weight of the man leaning on her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. If she stopped moving, the reality of what she had just done, getting fired, losing her income, assaulting her boss with words, would crash down on her. "You don't have to do this," Henry wheezed. His limp was getting worse. "Leave me at the bus stop. I'm used to the cold." "Shut up, Henry," Sarah said, though her tone was gentle. "You're not sleeping on a bench. Not tonight." They reached her building, the Regency Arms. It was a crumbling brick structure that looked like a bruised tooth in a mouth of shining glass skyscrapers. The front door lock was broken, hanging by a wire. The lobby smelled of damp carpet and mildew. Sarah helped Henry up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator had been out of order for 2 years. When she finally unlocked her door, apartment 3B, she nearly collapsed. The apartment was tiny, a single room that served as a living room and bedroom, with a kitchenette tucked into the corner. It was freezing inside. Sarah could see her breath puffing in the air. "Mommy?" A small voice came from the pile of blankets on the mattress in the corner. A little girl with messy blonde hair and pale skin sat up. She was hugging a worn-out teddy bear that was missing an eye. "Lily," Sarah breathed, rushing over to hug her daughter. "I'm home, baby. Why is it so cold? Did the radiator stop again?" "Mr. Gorton came," Lily whispered, coughing into her elbow. The sound was dry and rattling. "He turned a valve in the hallway. He said heat costs extra." Sarah's face hardened. Rage, hot and blinding, flared in her chest. "He turned it off? It's 30 degrees outside." Arthur, still huddled in his wet rags by the door, watched this scene with eyes that had turned into chips of ice. He knew the Regency Arms. It was part of his portfolio. He had allocated a budget of $2 million last year, specifically for heating upgrades in this building. Where did the money go? Arthur wondered. He looked at the peeling wallpaper, the black mold in the corner, and the shivering child. "I am the monster here," he realized. "I signed the checks, but I never checked the work." "Who is that?" Lily asked, looking at the dirty old man by the door. "This is Henry," Sarah said, standing up and forcing a cheerful voice. "He's a friend. He was cold, so he's going to have dinner with us." Sarah went to the cupboard. It was heartbreakingly bare. A half-empty box of pasta, 1 can of tomato soup, and 2 slices of bread. She made the soup, watering it down to make it stretch for 3 bowls. She toasted the bread and gave the biggest piece to Henry, the second biggest to Lily, and took the crust for herself. They sat on the floor, wrapped in blankets. "I'm sorry it's not much," Sarah apologized to Henry. Arthur took a spoonful of the watery soup. In his previous life, he dined on lobster, flown in from Maine, and truffles from Italy. But as he looked at Sarah, who was sipping her broth slowly to make it last, smiling at her daughter, despite having just lost her livelihood, this tasted better than any Michelin star meal. "It is a feast," Arthur said softly. "Thank you." Suddenly there was a heavy pounding on the door. Bam! 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 "Bennett, open up!" Sarah froze. Ideally, she would pretend not to be home, but the light was on. She stood up, trembling, and opened the door a crack. A man stood there. He was short, thick-necked, wearing a cheap suit that was too tight. He had a gold ring on his pinky finger and smelled of cheap cologne and sweat. This was Mr. Gorton, the building manager. "Mr. Gorton," Sarah said, "it's late." "It's never too late to collect, sweetheart," Gorton sneered, pushing the door open. He stepped inside, not bothering to wipe his muddy shoes. He looked around the apartment with a sneer, his eyes landing on Henry. "What is this?" Gorton laughed. "You're running a homeless shelter now. I should charge you double occupancy." "He's a guest," Sarah snapped. "Why did you turn off the heat? My daughter is sick." "The boiler is temperamental," Gorton lied smoothly. "And fuel costs money. Money you don't have. You're 3 days late on the rent, Sarah." "I have until Friday," Sarah argued. The notice said Friday. "I changed my mind," Gorton grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "I have a new tenant lined up who can pay cash up front. I want you out by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Sarah cried. "That's illegal. You can't do that." "I can do whatever I want. This is Sterling Estates property. We have lawyers. You have—" "What? A cripple and a coughing brat?" Arthur Sterling, sitting in the corner, felt a rage so pure it nearly made him dizzy. He gripped the spoon in his hand so hard it bent. He memorized Gorton's face. He memorized the way Gorton looked at Sarah, like she was trash. "Listen," Gorton said, stepping closer to Sarah, dropping his voice to a creepy whisper. "There is one way you can stay. You're a pretty girl, Sarah. Maybe we can work out a trade. You come down to my office in the basement, we have a few drinks, and I forget about the rent for this month." Sarah recoiled as if he had slapped her. "Get out! Get out of my apartment!" Gorton's face turned ugly. "Fine. Have it your way. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. If you're not gone, I'm calling the sheriff to throw your stuff on the curb." He turned and kicked over the small bowl of soup Sarah had placed on the floor for herself. The red liquid splattered across the worn carpet. "Oops," Gorton smirked. "Clean that up." He slammed the door as he left. Sarah stood there, staring at the spilled soup. It was her dinner. It was the last of the food. Her shoulders began to shake. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She just sank to her knees and buried her face in her hands, weeping silently so Lily wouldn't hear. Arthur watched her. He saw the complete and total destruction of a good woman. He stood up. His bad leg was forgotten for a moment. He walked over to her and placed a heavy, dirty hand on her shoulder. "Sarah," he said. His voice was different. The beggar's rasp was gone. It was steady, strong. "Look at me." She looked up, eyes red and swollen. "The night is darkest just before the dawn," he said. "Do you trust me?" I don't know, Henry," she sobbed. "I don't have anything left to trust with." "Go to sleep," he commanded gently. "Take the bed with your daughter. I will sleep by the door. No one will hurt you tonight." Sarah was too exhausted to argue. She crawled into the mattress with Lily, pulling the covers up. Within minutes, she passed out from sheer exhaustion. Arthur waited until their breathing was steady. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. His city. He looked at the tall, illuminated S on the top of the Sterling Tower in the distance. He pulled out his notebook. He crossed out the name Mr. Gorton. He didn't just cross it out. He tore the paper with the force of the pen. Then he walked to the door. He didn't limp. He opened it silently and stepped out into the freezing night. When Sarah woke up the next morning, the apartment was empty. The beggar was gone. And on the table, where the empty soup can sat, was a note written on a napkin. I have to go handle some business. Wait for me. A friend. Sarah crumpled the note, fresh tears falling. He left, she whispered. I gave him everything I had. And he just left. She had no idea that the business he was handling was about to shake the earth. Arthur Sterling did not look like a billionaire as he walked toward the glass doors of the Sterling Tower at 7:00 a.m. He looked like a nightmare. He was covered in mud, smelled of old soup and alleyways, and his beard was a tangled mess. He walked straight toward the main security desk. Hey, you! The security guard, a young man named Steve, stepped out, hand on his taser. Get out of here, no loitering. Arthur stopped. He stood to his full height, 6'3". He pulled back his shoulders. He lifted his chin. Despite the rags, the posture was unmistakable. Steve, Arthur said, his voice booming through the marble lobby. Your wife, Martha, just had a baby girl named Sophie 3 months ago. You're worried about the mortgage on your house in Queens, and if you don't lower that hand, you will be looking for a new job by noon. Steve froze. The color drained from his face. He stared into the piercing blue eyes of the homeless man. Oh, Mr. Sterling, Steve stammered. But you're dead. They said you were dead. I was merely observing, Arthur said. Give me your access badge. Now. Steve handed it over with trembling fingers. Arthur swiped it at the turnstile and marched toward the private executive elevators. He went straight to the penthouse floor. The office was empty, save for the cleaning crew. He walked into his private suite, which had been sealed off since his disappearance. He went into the adjoining bathroom. He turned on the shower, scrubbing away 6 months of grime. He shaved the beard, revealing the sharp, aristocratic jawline that had graced the cover of Forbes magazine 5 times. He opened his closet. His suits were still there. He selected a charcoal grey, 3-piece bespoke suit from Savile Row. He put on a crisp white shirt, a silk tie, and slipped on his Patek Philippe watch. When he looked in the mirror, hobbling Henry was dead. Arthur Sterling was back, and he looked like a predator. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Jenkins, he said. There was a crash on the other end, as if a chair had been knocked over. Sir? Is that a recording? Get in here, Jenkins, and bring the legal files regarding the Regency Arms eviction process. Also bring security. We have a board meeting to crash. At 9:00 a.m., the board of directors of Sterling Enterprises was in session. At the head of the table sat Charles Sterling, Arthur's nephew. Charles was 30 years old, handsome, arrogant, and currently smiling. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles said, tapping a pen on the mahogany table. The transition period is over. My uncle has been missing for 6 months. It is time to declare him legally deceased so we can move forward with the liquidation of the charity assets. The low-income housing projects are bleeding us dry. I propose we bulldoze the Regency Arms and build a luxury shopping mall. Here, here, muttered a few of the board members, greedy men who only cared about share prices. All in favor? Charles asked, raising his hand. The heavy double doors of the boardroom slammed open with a sound like a gunshot. Every head turned. Arthur Sterling strode into the room. He didn't walk, he glided, an unstoppable force of nature. Flanked by 4 large security guards and a pale-looking Jenkins, he looked healthier and more dangerous than he ever had before. "Uncle!" Charles gasped, standing up so fast his chair toppled over. You're alive!" "Disappointed?" Arthur asked smoothly. He walked to the head of the table. Charles scrambled out of the way. No, of course not. We were trying to protect the company." "By evicting single mothers and sick children?" Arthur asked, his voice low and deadly quiet. He picked up the file Jenkins had brought. He threw it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of the VP of Operations. "I have spent the last 6 months living on the streets of this city," Arthur announced, addressing the room. "I wanted to see what my legacy looked like from the gutter up. Do you know what I found?" Silence. You could hear a pin drop. "I found rot," Arthur spat. "I found managers stealing heating funds. I found my own employees treating human beings like garbage, and I found a board of directors eager to dance on my grave." He turned his gaze to Charles. "Charles, you are fired. You are removed from the family trust. You will leave this building immediately. If you take so much as a stapler, I will have you arrested for theft." "You can't do that!" Charles screamed, his face red. "I'm family." "Family looks for you when you're missing," Arthur said coldly. "Family doesn't try to bulldoze your soul. Get him out." Security dragged a kicking and screaming Charles out of the room. Arthur turned to the rest of the board. "Now, we are going to make some changes. Jenkins?" "Yes, sir?" "Get me the deed to the Regency Arms, and get me the deed to the Silver Fork Diner." "Already acquired, sir. We bought the diner this morning at 8:15 a.m. The previous owner, a Mr. Rick Slater, was surprised." "Good," Arthur smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "Now send a car for Sarah Bennett, and send a demolition crew." "A demolition crew, sir?" Jenkins asked, confused. "For the apartment?" "No," Arthur said. "For the diner." Back at the apartment, Sarah was packing boxes. She was crying. It was 9:30 a.m. Mr. Gorton would be here any minute to throw them out. "Mummy, where are we going?" Lily asked, holding her teddy bear. "I don't know, baby," Sarah choked out. Maybe a shelter." There was a knock at the door. Sarah flinched. It was him. Gorton. She walked to the door, wiping her eyes. She opened it, ready to beg for one more day. But it wasn't Gorton. Standing in the hallway was a tall man in a black suit with an earpiece. Behind him stood 2 other men. "Sarah Bennett?" the man asked. "Yes," Sarah whispered, terrified. "Was this the police? Did Rick call the cops about the stolen food?" "I am the head of security for Sterling Enterprises," the man said. "Mr. Arthur Sterling requests your immediate presence at his headquarters." "Mr. Sterling?" Sarah was confused. "The billionaire, the missing guy? I don't know him. I think you have the wrong person." "No mistake, Mom. Please come with us. Bring your daughter." "Am I in trouble?" Sarah asked, clutching the doorframe. "Is this about the rent?" The security guard smiled, a genuine warm smile that seemed out of place on his stoic face. "No, Mum, you're not in trouble, but you really don't want to keep him waiting." Confused, terrified, and wearing her only clean pair of jeans, Sarah took Lily's hand and followed the men downstairs. When they stepped outside, her jaw dropped. A sleek, black stretch limousine was parked in front of the crumbling building. Neighbors were hanging out of their windows, staring. Mr. Gorton was standing on the sidewalk, his mouth hanging open, looking pale as he watched the men usher Sarah into the back of the car. "What is happening?" Sarah whispered to herself as she sank into the leather seats. The car pulled away, gliding toward the city center, toward the tower, toward the truth. Sarah Bennett thought her life was over. She didn't realize that Hobbling Henry was about to hand her the world. The elevator ride to the penthouse of the Sterling Tower took 45 seconds. But to Sarah, it felt like a lifetime. Her ears popped as they ascended. Lily was clinging to her leg, her eyes wide as she looked at the glass walls revealing the city shrinking below them. Sarah felt painfully out of place. She was wearing her faded jeans with a stain on the knee and a sweater that had started to unravel at the cuffs. The security guards were immaculate statues in Italian suits. "Ma'am," the head guard said, as the doors slid open with a soft chime. "Mr. Sterling is waiting in the library." Sarah stepped out onto plush white carpet that felt deeper than the mattress she slept on. The room was massive, bigger than the entire floor of her apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle. There were sculptures that looked like they belonged in a museum, and a mahogany desk that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. A man was standing by the window, his back to them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that fit him like a second skin. "Mr. Sterling?" Sarah's voice trembled. I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a waitress. I don't know why I'm here." The man turned around slowly. Sarah blinked. He was handsome, older, distinguished, with silver hair at his temples and a clean-shaven face. He looked like the kind of man who owned islands. She didn't recognize him at all. "Please, sit down, Miss Bennett," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, and commanding. I'd rather stand," Sarah said, pulling Lily closer. "Look, if this is about the rent, I swear I'll pay." Mr. Gorton said, "This isn't about the rent," the man said. He walked closer, leaning against the front of his desk. He crossed his arms. "I wanted to thank you personally." "Thank me?" Sarah was baffled. "For what?" The man smiled. It was a small, knowing smile. And then his eyes twinkled. Those blue eyes. Sarah froze. She knew those eyes. "For the beef stew," the man said softly. "Though, if I'm being honest, the rolls were a little stale yesterday. The world seemed to tilt on its axis." Sarah gasped, taking a step back. She looked at his face again, searching for the dirt, the matted beard, the grime. She looked for the twisted, crippled leg. But he was standing perfectly straight. "Henry?" she whispered. "My name is Arthur Sterling," he said gently. "But yes, to you I was Henry." "But you," Sarah stammered, pointing at his legs. "You were crippled. You were starving. You were sleeping by the dumpster." "I was lost," Arthur corrected her. "I was broken, Sarah. But not physically. I had an accident 6 months ago. When I woke up, I realized no one in my life actually cared about me. They cared about the checkbook. They cared about the legacy. So I walked away. I wanted to see if there was any humanity left in this city." He took a step toward her. "I spent 6 months in the gutter. I was invisible. People walked over me. They spat on me. But then, there was you." Sarah felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from shock. "You were testing me?" "I was observing," Arthur said. "You have nothing, Sarah. You struggle to feed your own child, and yet, every single day, you risked your job to feed a stranger. You gave me your coat. You gave me your dignity when you stood up to Rick. You gave me a home last night when yours was being taken away." He walked over to his desk and picked up a small, leather-bound notebook. He opened it to a page and held it out to her. There was only one name written on the page: Sarah Bennett. "I have been looking for an heir, Sarah," Arthur said, his voice serious. "Not a blood heir. My blood relatives are vultures. I was looking for a spirit heir. Someone who understands that money is a tool, not a god." Sarah shook her head, tears welling up. "I don't understand." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you passed the test," Arthur said. "But the test isn't over. Now comes the hard part. Justice." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Jenkins, bring the car around. We're going to lunch." "Lunch?" Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. "Where?" Arthur's expression hardened. The warmth vanished, replaced by the cold steel of a titan of industry. "We're going to the Silver Fork," he said. "I believe I have a reservation." Sarah felt a knot of fear in her stomach. "Arthur, Mr. Sterling, Rick fired me. If I go back there, he'll cause a scene. He's a violent man." "I am counting on it," Arthur said darkly. He walked over and knelt down in front of Lily. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "Hello, Lily," he said softly. "Are you the beggar man?" Lily asked innocently. "I was," Arthur nodded. "But thanks to your mommy, I'm feeling much better. Do you like hamburgers?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Yes." "Then you shall have the biggest hamburger in Seattle," Arthur promised. He stood up and offered his arm to Sarah. "Sarah," he said, "for years you have served people who didn't deserve your kindness. Today, you are going to see what it feels like to be served." Sarah looked at his arm. She looked at her ragged sweater. Then she looked at his eyes. The eyes of the man she had saved. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and looped her arm through his. "Okay, Henry," she whispered. "Let's go." "Call me Arthur," he smiled. "Henry is retired." The Silver Fork diner was busy. It was the lunch rush. Rick Slater was sweating behind the counter, barking orders at the new girl he had hired that morning to replace Sarah. "Faster! Table 6 has been waiting 10 minutes. You're useless!" Rick shouted. He was in a foul mood. The dishwasher had quit, the toilet was backed up again, and he had a nagging feeling that he had made a mistake firing Sarah. Not because he cared about her, but because she was the only one who put up with his abuse for minimum wage. Suddenly, the chatter in the diner died down. It started at the front near the windows and spread like a wave of silence toward the back. Forks stopped clinking. People stopped chewing. Rick looked up from the register, wiping grease from his forehead. "What is going on? Why is everyone quiet?" He looked out the window. A convoy of 3 black SUVs had pulled up to the curb. A massive, sleek Rolls-Royce Phantom parked right in front of the fire hydrant. Rick's eyes widened. "Who the hell is that?" A driver in a uniform stepped out and opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce. First, a long, polished cane emerged, not for support, but for style. Then, Arthur Sterling stepped out. He adjusted his suit jacket, looking like he owned the very air he breathed. Rick didn't recognize him. He just saw money. Lots of money. "Holy cow," Rick muttered. "A whale. A big spender." He quickly smoothed his greasy hair and ran out from behind the counter. "Kyle, get table 1 cleared. VIP coming in." But then, Arthur didn't walk in alone. He turned back to the car and held out his hand. Sarah Bennett stepped out. She was still wearing her jeans and sweater, but flanked by the Billionaire, she looked different. She held her head high. Lily hopped out after her, holding a new teddy bear that Arthur had produced from the car during the ride. Rick's jaw dropped. "Sarah? What the—" The door to the diner opened. The bell jingled. Arthur walked in, Sarah on his arm. 2 large security guards followed them, standing by the door and crossing their arms. The entire diner watched. Rick stormed over, his confusion turning into anger. "Sarah, I told you never to come back here!" Rick hissed, ignoring the man in the suit for a second. "And who is this? Your lawyer? You think you can sue me? I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Arthur stepped forward, shielding Sarah. He towered over Rick. "Table for 3, Arthur said calmly. "By the window." Rick blinked, looking up at Arthur. The voice, it sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Look, pal," Rick sneered, trying to regain control. "I don't know who you are, but this girl is banned. She's a thief. She stole food from my inventory to feed a rat in the alley." "Is that so?" Arthur asked. He looked around the diner. "And you fired her for it?" "Damn right I did." Rick puffed out his chest. "I run a business, not a charity. Now get out before I call the cops." Arthur laughed. It was a dry, cold sound. "Actually, Rick, I'd like to order first." He walked past Rick, brushing his shoulder, and sat at the best booth by the window. He gestured for Sarah and Lily to sit. Sarah slid into the booth, her heart pounding. She saw the customers staring. She saw her old regulars, Mr. Henderson, watching with his mouth open. Rick, furious but confused by the man's confidence, marched over to the table. "I'm not serving you." "Oh, you will," Arthur said. He picked up the sticky plastic menu. "I'll have the beef stew, and make sure the rolls are fresh this time. Yesterday they were rock hard." Rick froze. The color drained from his face. "What did you say?" Arthur looked up. He let the mask slip. He narrowed his eyes and hunched his shoulders slightly, mimicking the posture of the beggar. "I said," Arthur rasped, dropping his voice to the gravelly tone of hobbling Henry, "you are too good for this place, girl." Rick stumbled back, hitting a wait station. Glasses crashed to the floor. You're... "The vermin," Arthur finished, his voice returning to its powerful baritone. "The rat in the alley. The man you threw dishwater on yesterday." "No," Rick stammered. "No, that's impossible. You're a bum. "I am Arthur Sterling," Arthur announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Owner of Sterling Enterprises. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I am the new owner of this building." Gasps erupted from the customers and staff. You bought the diner?" Rick whispered, shaking. "I bought the block," Arthur corrected. "But specifically, I bought this establishment to settle a debt." Arthur stood up. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He slammed it onto the table. "Rick Slater," Arthur said. "You are fired, effective immediately. And since I reviewed the books this morning, my auditors found that you have been skimming tips from your waitresses for 5 years. That is grand larceny. The police are waiting outside." As if on cue, the red and blue lights flashed through the window. 2 officers walked in. "Rick Slater?" one officer asked. "No. Wait, it was a mistake," Rick cried, looking at Sarah. "Sarah, tell them. I was a good boss. I gave you shifts when no one else would." Sarah looked at the man who had tormented her for years, the man who made her scrub toilets while he smoked, the man who tried to starve a crippled beggar. She stood up slowly. "You were never a boss, Rick," she said quietly. "You were a bully, and bullies always fall eventually." "Take him," Arthur commanded. The police handcuffed Rick and dragged him out. He was screaming, begging, crying. The customers broke into applause. Old Mr. Henderson clapped the loudest. When the noise died down, Arthur turned to Sarah. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, looking at the floor. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." "Sarah," Arthur said, lifting her chin with his finger. "Look around." She looked. The diner was silent, waiting. "I didn't buy this diner to run it," Arthur said. "I don't know the first thing about making coffee. I bought it for you." "For me?" Sarah gasped. "This is your restaurant now," Arthur declared. "The deed is in your name. You can keep it as it is, or you can turn it into the finest restaurant in Seattle. You are the boss. No one will ever tell you that you can't feed a hungry person again." Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing. "Arthur, I can't. This is too much. I can't repay you." "You already have," Arthur said. "You saved my life, Sarah. A restaurant is a cheap price for a soul." He turned to the kitchen staff, who were peeking out, terrified. "Well," Arthur boomed, "the owner is hungry. Get her a burger, and get me that stew." As the staff scrambled to obey, Lily tugged on Arthur's sleeve. "Mr. Arthur," she asked. "Yes, little one? Does this mean we can pay the bad man for the apartment now?" Arthur's smile faded. A dark cloud passed over his eyes. He had forgotten about Mr. Gorton. "Oh, Lily," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. "We are not going to pay the bad man. We are going to pay him a visit." He looked at Sarah. "Ready for stop number 2? Sarah wiped her tears. She looked at the deed on the table. She looked at the empty spot where Rick used to stand. She felt a fire igniting in her belly that hadn't been there in years. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm ready." The black limousine purred to a stop in front of the Regency Arms. It was a stark contrast to the grey, crumbling facade of the apartment building. On the sidewalk, Mr. Gorton was busy. He was tossing Sarah's meagre possessions into a wet cardboard box. "Garbage," Gorton muttered, throwing Lily's drawing pad onto the damp concrete. "Trash. All of it." He looked up as the car door opened. His eyes widened. He recognized the car. It was a phantom. He assumed Sarah had found some rich fool to pay her bills, just as he had lewdly suggested she do. "Well, well," Gorton smirked as Sarah stepped out, holding Lily's hand. He crossed his greasy arms. "Look who's back. Did you find a sugar daddy to pay your rent, Bennett? Or are you just here to beg for your stuff back?" Sarah didn't flinch. She felt the heavy, reassuring presence of Arthur standing right behind her. "I'm here for my things, Mr. Gorton," Sarah said calmly, "and I'm here to return your keys." "Good," Gorton spat, "because I already rented the place. Got a guy moving in tonight who pays cash. No kids, no noise." "And no heat?" A deep voice rumbled from behind Sarah. Gorton squinted. He saw the tall man in the immaculate grey suit step forward. He didn't recognize the face, but he recognized the authority. "Who are you?" Gorton asked, his confidence wavering slightly. "Her lawyer?" "I am the landlord," Arthur stated simply. Gorton laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Buddy, you're confused. Sterling Estates owns this building. I manage it. I'm the landlord." "You are a leech," Arthur corrected him, stepping onto the sidewalk. He towered over the short, stout man. "And you are stealing from me." "Excuse me?" Gorton bristled. "You better watch your mouth, pal." "I allocated $2 million for boiler repairs and insulation upgrades for this building 10 months ago, Arthur said, his voice like grinding stones. "I signed the check myself, yet I slept on the floor of apartment 3B last night, and I could see my breath. Where is my heating system, Mr. Gorton?" Gorton's face went pale. He took a step back, nearly tripping over Sarah's box. How do you know about that?" "Because I am Arthur Sterling," he said, "and I have been reading your ledger." Gorton's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the railing of the stoop to hold himself up. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I thought you were dead. The news said—" "The news was wrong, and you were betting on it," Arthur said, closing the distance. "You pocketed the repair money. You turned off the valves to save on fuel costs you were already stealing. You let children freeze so you could buy—" Arthur looked down at Gorton's hand. "A tacky gold ring and a cheap suit." "I can explain," Gorton squeaked. "It's a misunderstanding. The contractors, they delayed the work." "Jenkins," Arthur called out without turning around. The loyal assistant stepped out of the front seat of the limo, holding a thick file. "I have the bank records here, sir. Transfers from the maintenance fund directly to a private account in Mr. Gorton's name. It's clear embezzlement." "Mr. Gorton," Arthur said, his voice devoid of pity, "you are evicted, not just from your job, but from the apartment you occupy on the first floor. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. After that, the police will be here to discuss the missing $2 million. "You can't do this," Gorton cried, tears of panic streaming down his face. "I have nowhere to go." Arthur looked at him. For a second, Sarah thought he might show mercy. After all, Arthur knew what it was like to be homeless. "Then I suggest you find a diner," Arthur said coldly, "and hope there is a waitress there with a kinder heart than you showed her." Arthur turned his back on him. "Get him out of my sight." Security guards stepped forward to escort the sobbing landlord away. Arthur turned to Sarah and Lily. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by a soft warmth. "Sarah," he said, "you won't be living in 3B anymore." Sarah looked at the building. "I know. I can afford a better place now, with the restaurant." "No," Arthur shook his head. "I mean, you won't be living in that 3B. I am cancelling the demolition order for the Regency Arms. We are going to renovate it completely. New heat, new windows, new roof, and I am transferring the ownership of the building to a non-profit trust." "A trust?" "The Lily Trust," Arthur smiled at the little girl. "Dedicated to providing affordable housing for single mothers, and I need someone to manage it. Someone who knows what the tenants need." Sarah gasped. "You want me to run the building?" "You run the diner. You run the building. You run the world, Sarah," Arthur laughed. "I'm just funding it." The bell above the door of the Golden Spoon, formerly the Silver Fork, chimed happily as customers poured in. The place was unrecognizable. The grease was gone, replaced by warm lighting, fresh flowers, and the smell of the best beef stew in Seattle. Sarah Bennett moved through the dining room with grace. She wasn't wearing a stained apron anymore. She wore a tailored blazer and jeans. She was the owner, but she still poured coffee for the regulars. "Thanks, Sarah," old Mr. Henderson said, tucking into a slice of pie. "Best in the city." "On the house, Mr. Henderson," Sarah smiled. In the corner booth, the one permanently reserved with a small brass plaque that read, "Henry's Table," sat Arthur Sterling. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was wearing a casual sweater, looking younger and happier than he had in decades. Next to him sat Lily, who was now 7 years old. Her cheeks were rosy, her asthma almost non-existent, thanks to the top-tier medical care Arthur had arranged. "Uncle Arthur," Lily said, colouring in a book, "are you coming to the school play tomorrow?" "I wouldn't miss it for a board meeting, kiddo," Arthur grinned. Sarah walked over to the table. She placed a fresh pot of tea down and sat next to Arthur. "How are numbers?" Arthur asked, though he didn't really care about the money. "Up 20%, Sarah said, "but we gave away 50 meals out the back door today." "Good," Arthur nodded. "That's the most important profit margin." He reached out and took Sarah's hand. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not exactly. It was something deeper. It was the bond of two people who had seen the worst of the world and decided to build something better together. "You know," Arthur said, looking out the window at the rain, "I lost a fortune when I disappeared. I lost 6 months of my life." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Do you regret it?" Arthur looked at Sarah, then at Lily, and then at the bustling diner full of happy people. "Regret it?" Arthur smiled. "Sarah, I was a beggar who thought he was a king. Now I'm just a man who knows the truth." "And what's the truth?" she asked. "That the only thing we keep is what we give away." Sarah smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside, the rain washed the city clean, but inside, everything was warm. And that is the incredible story of how one bowl of soup changed the destiny of 2 lives. Sarah thought she was saving a beggar, but she was actually saving herself. It proves that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. You never know who you are helping, or how the universe will repay you. Arthur Sterling learned that true wealth isn't in the bank, it's in the heart. And Sarah proved that even when you have nothing, you still have the power to be a hero. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Would you have risked your job to feed Henry? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that inspires you. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind, always.